Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another video with Swagglehos. And in this video, we're taking a look at Go Collect's hottest trending comics for the week of October 1st. Now, for those who don't know, Go Collect puts out weekly articles. They analyze the hottest selling comic books based on volume of sales and sudden increase in movement in the market. So think of these 5 books as the most liquid this past week. But before I get into it, if you guys could like, comment, subscribe, I would appreciate it. Help support the channel. But let us get into this video here today. Of course, this article is written by Matt Tuck. I will put a link in the description like I always do. And I'm very excited to talk about this list this week because sometimes you have some good lists and sometimes you have some not so exciting lists. But this one, I feel like every single book has a big story attached to it, including this one right here, which I apologize that the image is not working, but coming in here at the number 83 slot, we're talking about The Walking Dead #1, new to the list this week. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, this is the book that came out in 2003, written by Robert Kirkman, that would feature the first issue of the famed series, The Walking Dead. Now, it's been a little while since we've spoken about The Walking Dead on this channel. The Walking Dead series has been out of the zeitgeist for quite a little bit of time, but it's interesting to see it back on the list this week. And one of the reasons I think that we're seeing it here is that there's just a lot of stuff happening right now with Skybound and Robert Kirkman. Obviously, he brought back the series Void Rivals, or I should say, he's kind of reinvigorating the Transformers property with Void Rivals. So there's a lot of people looking at his work right now, and a lot of people remembering that The Walking Dead is sort of the gold standard when it comes to indie title that could get optioned and then brought to, a streaming service and then actually, increase the value of the book, because, there's a lot of people out there that, are always picking up these #1 issues of various series. And the comparison that they always make is that, hey, you never know, this could be the next Walking Dead. But it's interesting with this book because obviously, like all books, this has had its ups and downs throughout its life cycle, but we're finally starting to see it on an uptrend. And that's a very, very good sign, because I do think that it is important that books like The Walking Dead #1 are celebrated throughout comic book culture, not just because of their significance to the pop culture, but their significance to the medium as a whole. But as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 3,046 universal copies on the census, 3,600 total graded. 9.9s actually have 23 9.9s on the census. That's actually surprising to see, but let's take a look at the 9.8s here. There's basically 999, basically 1,000, which is a pretty high rate when we're talking about 9.8s of this book. Fair market value 2,900, 30-day moving at 2,789. And this is a book that, for a while was really dipping back down. I mean, here you had the increase of the book all throughout, the seasons of the show, peaking in 2016 when the series was at its peak, and then of course dropped off after that all the way back down to 1750 in 2020, shot up with the COVID boom, had corrected back down, and now where it sits is kind of in a healthy spot. I mean, not quite the level that it was at the height of the show, but we're getting there. And who knows, maybe in the future this book can continue to trend up as time goes on. Then of course down here at the bottom, not going to see it slabbed at the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically they still sell around that $700, $800, maybe $1,000 range, depending on the grade and depending on the deal that you can find for yourself. All right, let's move on now to the 4th hottest trending comic of the week. And the 4th hottest trending comic of the week is just in time, as here we are in the month of October talking about horror comic books in the comic book social media landscape. But here we are talking about Swamp Thing #1, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 73rd spot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1972, drawn by Bernie Wrightson, that would feature the first appearance of the Alec Holland version of Swamp Thing. Now, this is a very cool book to talk about. Many things to break down here. Obviously, ever since we had the James Gunn announcement of the DC Universe and the fact that Swamp Thing is going to be coming, this has been a very, very important book for a lot of speculators out there. I mean, when I was growing up, Swamp Thing was absolutely my favorite character. I love that 80s movie. Now, House of Secrets 92 is technically the first appearance of Swamp Thing, but this right here is the first appearance of the, superhero version of Swamp Thing, certainly the one that they're going to use on screen. So in a lot of ways, I think this is a very underrated book in comparison to House of Secrets 92. It is also the classic Bernie Wrightson cover. Now, Bernie Wrightson has done a lot of amazing artwork throughout the Bronze Age. We're kind of now approaching, Halloween, where a lot of PCH books are going to get hot. A lot of bronze horror is going to get hot. So I think a lot of movement for this book makes sense, even outside of the, DC movie factor. So all things considered, makes a lot of sense as to why it's showing up on the list this week, but a very cool book regardless. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 2,863 universal copies, 3,000 total graded. 9/8 only have 40 on the census, fair market value 5,500, 1 year moving 5,500 as well. There actually hasn't been a sale in quite a bit of time, not since April of this year. Be curious to see what this book would sell for right now. Is the book actually going up, or has it been going down due to macro factors in the economy? But let's take a look at some of the other grades here and see if we can get a little more accurate depiction of what's going on in the current movement of the book. 9/6 have 139 on the census, 1 year moving 1265, 30-day moving 1300. So this is actually a book that has actually had a little bit of an uptick, and you can actually see that even in 2021, where this book did get generally inflated and had some of its pullback. I mean, overall, this has been a much more steady line as far as the year-over-year returns, at least going back to, say, the mid-2010s and things like that. 2014 was a $400, $500 book, and now kind of where it sits is around that $1,200, $1,300 range. So a book that has been slowly been going up, got a little bit inflated with COVID, but didn't get too ahead of itself, which I think is a good sign if you're somebody who actually wants to pick up this book. 8/5s, $300, 30-day moving, 7/0s, $200, 30-day moving, and then down here at the bottom, I'm not going to see it slab too often at the low grade, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically you can find low grades sitting around that $150, maybe $200 level, depending on the deal and depending on the grid. All right, let's move on now to the third hottest trending comic of the week. And the third hottest trending comic of the week is one that is kind of returning to the list, although a different version of this book. This one right here is World Tree #1 Recalled Edition, new to the list this week, now sitting in the 39 slot. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's a book that came out in 2023, written by James Tynion. That would be the first issue of the World Tree series. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with this series, James Tynion writing a bunch of very, very popular new comic series. We talked about The Walking Dead #1. A lot of people are thinking, hey, maybe James Tynion series are going to be the next Walking Dead #1. World Tree was one of those issues that a lot of people have been specking on. But one of the things I think is interesting about this is you can see that there's a murdered person over here. Well, when this book initially got printed, this section underneath the bed was actually too dark for people to make out, and it was actually recalled. And anytime you have a situation where there's a recall or an error variance, you know how speculators are going to speculate. You know how people think that these books are going to be the ones to actually collect. And a lot of people have been jumping on this one. I think this book actually did make it out to a lot of Canadian stores. So a lot of people have been sending this one in for grading. But one of the funny things is that if we dig into the numbers here, we actually already see 319 universal copies graded of the recalled edition. Now, if you go to the regular edition, there's only 200 copies that are actually graded. So the recalled currently at this moment in time has more of a census than that of the regular book. I'm sure that over the years that'll start to change, but at least for right now, it seems like people are mostly speculating on the recalled one. But definitely a cool book, kind of an interesting one, and who knows if this series ever becomes the next Walking Dead. But let's take a look at some of these numbers right here. Of course, when it came out, it was an $89 pre-screen, jumped all the way up to $100, and now kind of back up around that, between $100 and $50 range. I mean, here's a 54, here's an 80, here's a 100, here's a 75, here's an 80. So kind of, bouncing back and forth. And again, a lot of people just thinking, hey, now is a good time to pick up some of these books. You never really know with a series like this. I mean, if Walking Dead #1 can sell for, $1,500 years down the line, maybe World Tree can do the same. All right, let's move on now to the second hottest trending comic of the week. And the second hottest trending comic of the week is the one that we've all been waiting to talk about. This is the one that is setting the comic book market on storm. I mean, you just can't get enough Taylor Swift out there in this universe. But of course, we're talking about Uncanny X-Men #130, up 62 spots, now sitting in the 21st slot, the 21st most bought and sold comic out there in the market. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1980, written by Chris Claremont, that would feature the first appearance of the character known as Dazzler. Now, we talked about before why this book got market attention. Of course, there's a lot of rumors and speculation that Taylor Swift is going to be playing Dazzler in the Deadpool 3 movie, and she's actually been seen now at the Kansas City Chiefs games. Of course, we're in NFL season, and the rumors are right now that she's dating Travis Kelce, which is, hey, great for her, because Travis Kelce is, one of the best football players out there in the NFL. And this is a really big opportunity for Taylor Swift. I mean, dating Travis Kelce, that's a big deal for her. She might actually become a celebrity off of this. Obviously, I'm just kidding. If you guys have been watching those TikTok memes, they're pretty funny. And just last night, she was seen once again at the game, but this time with Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman. I mean, if that's not a confirmation that these people are not, hanging out, rubbing elbows, making movies together, I don't know what is. And so a lot of people jumping back on the X-Men 130 train, making it the second hottest comic of the week. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. 4,452 universal copies, 5,000 total graded, 199 on the census. If I was the person holding the 99, I might consider selling right now. Let me know in the comments. Would you guys sell your 99 at this moment in time? 98s have 339 in the census, fair market value 1350. Hasn't been a sale recently, but I would say its 90-day average is kind of where this book probably wants to be. Back in 2020, it was around a $700, $800 book. Kind of last couple sales, maybe around the $1,200 range or so. And I would say that that's probably, pretty accurate of where it should be after its COVID correction. Top of census here, only 7.6 at the 9.8 level, all black cover. Of course, you won't see it graded down here at the bottom, but when you go into eBay looking for raw copies of this thing, typically they now sell around that $80, $90, $100 range, even some of those reader copies. So the floor has been lifted for this book, and it'll be interesting to see what it sells for once we get Deadpool 3. All right, let's move on now to the hottest trending comic of the week. And the hottest trending comic of the week is another one that is interesting to see on the list this week. But of course, we're talking about a classic book right here. Wolverine #1, the limited series, up 5 spots. Now the #1 most bought and sold book out there in the market. And what is the significance of this? Well, of course, it's the book that came out in 1982, written by Chris Claremont, drawn by Frank Miller, that would feature the first limited series for the character Wolverine. Now, of course, all you guys know this book. I don't need to talk about how Hugh Jackman is also going to be in Deadpool 3, but one of the things I think is interesting as to why this book maybe got some market attention recently is that one of the hottest books that we had this last week was a Capullo Wolverine variant cover that was a one per store that got hot out there in the market. And a lot of people had been buying that up. And I saw a lot of conversation online, kind of poo-pooing on variant covers and new modern books. And a lot of people talking about, hey, the prices you're paying for this variant cover, you could easily just be picking up a Wolverine #1. And it kind of opened up this very interesting conversation and dialogue about, where you want to put your money, the this or that, should you get this book versus that book? And it's a very interesting one. And maybe there's a lot of people out there that, due to that recent variant, kind of went back and thought to themselves, hey, I should pick up a Wolverine #1. A lot of Wolverine collectors out there. So that could be one of the reasons why this book had some market attention. I mean, anytime you have new comic books that get hot about a certain character, it's always going to have a ripple effect to that character's, other keys and other books, which again, I think is actually one of the important things to consider when we're all thinking about, new comic books and new modern variants and things of that nature. I know a lot of people, on the vintage side of things like to make fun of variants, but at the same time, sometimes those variant covers and modern comic book attention actually increases the values of the vintage market. And as we dig into the numbers for this one, let's take a look at some of the values here. Census has it at 21,624 universal copies, 310Os on the census, 27 99s, 98s have 3,836. Fair market value is 700. 30-day moving is 641. This is kind of an interesting one as we think about our census. It's possible that this one is still a little bit overinflated. As you guys can see, even back in 2005, it was a $271 book. I mean, the graph was fairly flat for many, many, many years until we got to COVID, where this thing shot up, and it's had its major correction and pullback to now where it sits around that $600 range. Is still well above what it was selling for at the end of 2020. So it's possible that this book continues to sink back down a little bit as we go throughout the months, but still a very cool book. The problem is that there's just so many options out there. 9.6 is 300-day moving average, and then of course down here in the bottom, I'm not going to see it slabbed at the low grade, but when you go onto eBay looking for raw copies, typically you can see them being sold around that $70, $80, maybe $100 range, depending on the deal and depending on the grade you can find for yourself. Anyways, that's all for this video. Those were Go Collect's hottest trending comics of the week. Do you guys have any of these books? What did you guys think of the list? Are you buying up those X-Men 130s? Excited about Taylor Swift playing Dazzler? Let me know in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. See you on the next one.